And so, friends, this morning I want to speak to you about the upcoming inquiry which the former Home Secretary invited me to chair into events at Orgreave on the 18th of June 1984 and their aftermath. Most of you will recall that the inquiry was announced in July last year. This morning I want to say a little about why I have agreed to take on this considerable additional responsibility, then something more briefly about what I have already been doing in the past 6 months, and finally something about what the inquiry is likely to require of me in the next couple of years. I hope Synod will find this helpful. First of all then, why did I accept the Home Secretary's invitation? Well, right at the heart of my sense of my calling to be the Bishop of Sheffield is a deep desire for the revitalisation and of the diocese, and especially the revitalisation of its parishes. That is my primary focus, the goal towards which my daily prayers and best energies are constantly devoted. And whenever I have been asked to take on responsibilities outside this diocese, I have sought under God to discern whether it will help or hinder the realisation of that primary goal. So in 2023, I stood for election as a church commissioner, and subsequently in 2024, gladly joined the Triennium Funding Group because I was convinced that the financial inequalities across the Church of England inhibit the realisation of our diocesan vision, and that I could advance it by being part of that conversation about future financial disbursements of church commissioner money. I believe that was for me time well spent, and just for the record, I should tell you that I had recently accepted an invitation from the Archbishops to chair the next Triennium Funding Working Group, which will convene in 2027. Again, I believe taking on that responsibility, thank you very much, taking on that responsibility will advance our goal towards revitalisation. Again, when in 2024 I was invited to become a member of the LLF Programme Board, I accepted because this is one of the dioceses in which the use of the prayers of love and faith is most contested, and I discern under God that being in a position to influence the exploration of next steps would again benefit this diocese and the realisation of our vision. I appreciate that very few of you here will think that the outcome at General Synod was a good one, but I honestly believe it to be the least worst one. By the same token, I have accepted the invitation to chair the Orgreave Inquiry and its independent panel because I believe it will promote and prosper the mission of God in South Yorkshire and the East Riding. I believe it to be integral to, and not a distraction from, the cure of souls for the people of this diocese with which I have been entrusted. Here we are this morning in Belkay, where the coal mine only closed in 1993, almost a decade after Orgreave, with a loss of 450 jobs. Even at the end of the miners' strike in 1985, there were still 36 active coal mines in this diocese, most of them in the Doncaster Archdeaconry in places like Dennerby, Hickleton, Wath, Darfield, Kilnares, Askell, Rossington, but also near Rotherham at Kiverton Park, Treeton and Dinnington. In fact, the last mines to close in South Yorkshire were at Maltby as recently as 2013 and Hatfield Stainforth in 2015, a little over a decade ago. At its peak, there were over 100 coal mines across South Yorkshire, employing over 100,000 miners. The disruption of the mining industry in the mid-1980s did not mean only a loss of jobs. It meant the loss of a way of life. Welfare clubs, brass bands, gays, hyper-local dialects and pit talk, a sort of gallows humour and tight-knit community solidarity. In many of the communities we serve, the loss of these things is still keenly felt, and there remains an unresolved trauma on account of a lack of agency in these communities at the time when pits were being closed. There was, and there remains, a sense of being done to. The so-called Battle of Orgreave during the 1984-85 miners' strike occupies a pivotal place in the story of that disruption. It took place at a coking plant on the outskirts of Rotherham on the 18th of June 1984. 55 men arrested at Orgreave were charged with riot, which at that time could be punished with life imprisonment. A further 40 were charged with unlawful assembly. Initial reports claimed that the pickets provoked the violence, with police only acting in self-defence. However, charges against the miners were dropped in 1985 after trials collapsed, and in 1991 South Yorkshire Police paid £425,000 in compensation to 39 miners for assault, wrongful arrest, unlawful detention, and malicious prosecution. I've heard from many people across South Yorkshire who feel that what happened at Orgreave reflects the more general disruption experienced by mining communities in the mid-1980s. People often ask me what I hope the inquiry will achieve, and my answer is a resolution, or at least a good step towards the resolution of that trauma. For individual miners who were assaulted or arrested at Orgreave, who feel their story has not yet been fully told. For their families and their communities more generally, who still live with the impact of those events to this day. For the relationship between policing and former mining communities. Whilst there have been significant changes in the oversight of policing since 1984, including changes to public order policing and practices, questions about the policing at Orgreave remained unanswered. In other words, friends, I accepted the former Home Secretary's invitation to chair this inquiry because I believe it to be the call of God. I appreciate that this work may arouse concerns among some of you, either politically or practically. I do realise that the inquiry and ultimately its findings are likely to prove politically controversial in some quarters. But I am confident personally that the pursuit of truth is always pleasing to God and will be pleasing to God, whatever the outcome of this inquiry. That's the first thing. Secondly, let me touch more briefly on what I've been doing since the inquiry was announced in July last year. In doing so, it is important for me to stress that this inquiry is wholly independent of government. But because this is a statutory public inquiry under the 2005 Inquiries Act, there are steps which the Home Secretary and government ministers are required to take before the inquiry can be fully launched. These include signing off the terms of reference, which will set out specifically what the inquiry will investigate, and agreeing a panel to support and advise me. So during the late summer and into the autumn, I engaged in a series of stakeholder consultation meetings to explore those two matters, the terms of reference and the composition of the panel, with the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, with South Yorkshire Police, with a number of police support organisations, with several MPs who serve former coal mining constituencies, with the National Union of Mine Workers, and with the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. That has been useful, careful, preparatory work, and I hope we may be reaching the point at which the Home Secretary will feel able to sign off both the terms of reference and the composition of the panel. Meanwhile, the Inquiry Secretary and the Inquiry Solicitor have been appointed, and they are gradually assembling the teams which will undertake much of the day-to-day work of the inquiry here in South Yorkshire. Finally, what will the inquiry require of me in the next couple of years? Well, I had made it clear to the Home Office from the outset that I can commit at most one indicative full day per working week to this task. My day job remains my day job and not being seconded. Obviously, it won't be quite as neat as one day a week, although I am intending to set aside a specific day for this work, probably Wednesday. There will doubtless be ebbs and flows to the work, periods of more intense activity and less. And as a matter of fact, the other panel members will also only be offering a portion of their week to this task. It is the Secretariat which will be full-time. There are also good grounds to expect the inquiry to be relatively brief. The terms of reference state that the inquiry will expect to deliver its report within 2 years. That is ambitious, certainly, but it's not ludicrous. And I would rather aim for an ambitious deadline and miss it marginally than meander along without urgency because no stretching deadline has been fixed. I also want to put on the record this morning the fact that I will not benefit financially from this role. The Home Office will be paying me a realistic day rate for my time and expertise, but I had agreed with the Home Secretary at that end and with the Bishop's Council at this end that I shall simply make over the payments I receive to our Diocesan Board of Finance. I'm afraid that new income will not be enough to wipe out our budgeted deficit, but it is important that you know I am not moonlighting. Friends, I do feel very keenly the weight of responsibility I have taken on, my responsibility to you, to the people of South Yorkshire and Leeds Riding, to the Home Office, to key stakeholders, to my fellow panel members, and to the inquiry team. My aim is to deliver an outstanding inquiry as swiftly as thoroughness will allow, and to follow the evidence without prejudice wherever it might lead, wholly independent of government. And your prayers to that end will be much appreciated. Thank you.